Now, as an elected official, I've had the pleasure of introducing many, many, many distinguished speakers. But for Richard Florida, it's not enough to say that he's a global research professor at NYU. He's much more than that. In an earlier generation, we had voices like Jane Jacobs who illuminated the importance of American cities. Today, that voice belongs to Richard Florida, who understands better than anyone how cities will drive our future, not only in America, but around the world. His writings and commentaries have guided my thinking, first as borough president and now as controller. Richard is a visionary who understood the profound shifts of the creative economy long before anybody else. And he's mentoring the next generation of leaders who will confront these issues head on. He has always been willing to search and engage for the new issues facing us as we head into the 21st, as we are in the 21st century. Now, I've been a huge fan of his for years. I'm glad that we finally have got him here in the world's greatest city, working as an academic and visionary. It is really an honor and a great privilege to present to each and every one of you Professor Richard Florida, our co-presenter at this conference. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much, Scott, Controller Stringer, for that very, very kind introduction and those incredibly inspiring and motivating words. We both agree this is the beginning of a conversation about the future of the world's greatest city and the future of the world's cities. And in a way, I take your challenge seriously. We are very much back in the situation that Jane Jacobs was a generation or more ago in the late 1950s when she was confronting the bulldozers and saving neighborhoods. We don't have to confront the bulldozers, well, not that much anyway. We have to confront a much more powerful set of forces, a market and an economy that has recognized the true power of cities, and that is at once generating tremendous re-urbanization and economic potential because of the clustering of investment and talent and skills, but at the very same time dividing us in ways no one would have thought possible. The same force that creates our urban renaissance, our economic revival, stimulates technology, simultaneously divides us. And the comptroller is right. We've had enough work bemoaning that. I'll talk more about that in a second. We've had enough work bemoaning that, but we have a very real task before us, and that is to keep the engine's fire burning, keep the engine's fire fueled, stoke that fire of urbanization, but do it in a way that creates on-ramps of opportunity and includes everyone. We have to build a city for all, and urbanism for all, and we have to build a middle class. That's the challenge of our new generation of urbanites and city leaders. And that's what I want to take a little time to talk to you all about today. What better place to do it than New York City and this phenomenal university, where I hold a joint appointment between here and the University of Toronto. John Sexton brought me here. I get to work with a fabulous group of people like Dean Rosemary Scanlon, who I've known for the better part of a decade, who probably knows more about the inner workings of this city and its economic development machinery than anyone, who heads our phenomenal Shack Institute. Our new dean, Dennis DiLorenzo, who couldn't be with us today. He's dealing with a family matter. His mom's sick. And who's taken over the School of Continuing and Professional Studies and done it with great aplomb. He's allowed us to build a new program that this event is really the kickoff for, which you can see there. It's the Initiative for Creativity and Innovation in Cities. We're not just teaching academic seminars. We're getting our hands dirty. Under the leadership of my great friend Stephen Pedigo, who I've worked with for more than a decade. Stephen's the director of that program. He'll be running a city building course, the first of its kind for high school kids, starting later this month. In the fall, we'll be kicking off a new certificate program, not for academics, but for people out there in the real world city builders and economic developers in this city and other cities in the suburbs and around the world, to give them tools at an economical tuition and a certificate in how to do creative and inclusive economic development. We call it our Certificate in Creative Cities and Economic Development. And we'll be undertaking real applied research on this city in the future. So that's what we're about. That's why all of us are here today, and with these phenomenal panelists that you'll hear from a little later. Just an incredibly distinguished group of people who care so deeply about the future of this city, about its creativity, about making it more inclusive, about building these on-ramps and ensuring its growth. Now, if you scroll back not too long ago to the economic crisis of 2008, you can remember, I can remember, because I wrote a cover story for The Atlantic about this. New York City was down. New York City was headed further down. The finance sector would collapse, and New York City would lose its global economic city status, whether it was Hong Kong or London, Shanghai, or the centers of the Sunbelt. New York was going to be eclipsed. And at that time, I said something that was seen to be a bit of an outlier, almost heretical. I said, going back and reading my own Jane Jacobs, that I thought the city had the seeds of its own reinvention, and that we had miscast the city as simply a center for finance, insurance, and real estate, when the city was so much more. I wrote a book about it. I called it A Great Reset. I argued that we were going through not just an economic crisis, but a transformation. And that transformation was from an older, bureaucratic, top-down industrial economy to a newer, knowledge-driven economy, which drew on the talents of its knowledge workers, its technology workers, and of all its workers. And I argued in that book that it wasn't enough simply to build that new economy. We had to build a new way of organizing our cities and urban areas. I called attention to suburbanization after the Great Crash, and how the rise of suburbanization and a new way of living, a new American dream of good, high-paying factory jobs combined with the ability to buy a home in the suburbs created a middle class and extended the benefits of that industrial economy to many more people. And I argued that was our task today. That was the beginnings of our task today. That it was not only enough to build a knowledge economy and a technology economy, that we had to upgrade the millions upon millions of lower wage, lower skill service jobs, and we had to reinvest in our cities, build infrastructure, and build a new way of life and a new American dream around this urban revival. But I missed something. And I think all of us missed something. No one could have expected the speed of the revival, the speed of reurbanization, and the challenges this fundamental shift in our economy would cause. New York City has already gained the jobs it's lost back, more than 4 million private sector jobs. It's media, entertainment, digital media. Look at the boom in high technology in this city. I did the first studies of venture capital financed high technology in 1985 through 1988. New York City didn't get a dime in venture capital financing. The money that was collected here was sent to the San Francisco Bay Area and the suburbs of Boston. New York City, and particularly Lower Manhattan, has now the second largest volume of venture capital investment in high technology aside from the Bay Area. It has eclipsed Boston, it has eclipsed Seattle, it has eclipsed Austin, and is becoming one of the world's great technology centers. But at the same time, this urban revival has caused deep and fundamental problems. You all know this. We had an election about it. Inequality has grown to heights not seen since the Gilded Age. Housing, as the Comptroller mentioned, has become unaffordable for many, if not for most. not just the working class, not just the middle class, but for the knowledge workers themselves. And our city is sorting, is the word we use. It's separating, segregating. I'll have a major report on this coming out in the fall. Our cities are sorting and segregating in ways that are even worse than inequality itself. We are separating ourselves into more homogeneous communities by income, by class group, by level of education, and sometimes by race and ethnicity, but by all of these dimensions in ways that threaten to undermine the very diversity, the density, the intermixing, the synergies and serendipities that make a city a center of innovation. As I said at the outset, we're dealing with something quite complicated. We're not going to solve it in an afternoon, but we're going to raise this conversation, and we're going to raise it in this city. This isn't an either-or, it's a both. The engine of our economy today isn't technology. It isn't automation. It isn't globalization. It isn't more powerful factories. It isn't simply technological innovation that occurs in a vacuum. It is the clustering of people in dense urban environments. That is the fundamental engine of human progress. And at the same time, that clustering of people, of skill, of investment and talent is dividing us. We have to square that circle if we want to be successful. We can't just bemoan it. We can't put the brakes on the engine. It would be the equivalent of going back to the industrial age and saying the solution is to burn down the factories and to go back to the farm. No, what we did then is we built a middle class of factory workers and gave them the ability to participate in a dream. We have to stoke that engine of clustering, but create the on-ramps and make it work for all. My academic field has a real challenge. When I look at my field, I see it divided into two fundamentally imposed camps, and I think you'll all recognize this. On the one hand are the urban optimists. I'd put myself in that camp. I'd put people like Edward Glaser in that camp. My colleague Paul Romer, Rosemary Scanlon, Bruce Katz at the Brookings Institution, Ben Barber, who says that mayors can and should do more. People who believe that the urban future is optimistic, but I think we've overestimated it and looked at it in very rose-colored glasses. None of us anticipated, myself included, the deep and fundamental problems that would be generated by this urban revival and the unevenness with which it would spread. If New York and London and Hong Kong are succeeding, Cleveland and Detroit and many of the old Sunbelt cities are struggling, our winners and losers, the gaps become bigger, but not just between cities and metro areas, not just between New York and Detroit, between San Francisco and Cleveland, within our cities. The same factors that are creating winners and losers across the world are creating winners and losers side by side in our cities. We have a story where a third of us, not just the 1%, not just the 5%, a third of us who understand the knowledge economy, who understand the tools of digital media, who make technology work for us are doing pretty well. But 2/3 of us are falling further and further behind. You all know the story. The old economy of manufacturing has fallen by the wayside. We lost nearly half of our manufacturing jobs and working class jobs, including blue-collar construction jobs, since 1970. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs, and our blue-collar working class manufacturing sector continues to decline, taking with them those good jobs. We've grown a new two-tiered economy. We've seen the rise in a fundamental way of this knowledge, technology, innovation, and creative-driven economy here in New York. And if people tell you this is a business and finance and management-driven economy, it is to an extent, but not exclusively. We've grown about 260,000 jobs in finance since the crisis, 6% growth rate. We've grown about 210,000 management jobs, a 6% growth rate. We've grown another 125,000 jobs in arts, design, media, and entertainment, a 12% growth rate, twice the level as business, finance, and management, and our most dominant clusters are in that area. When I look at the transformation of a segment I know, the media landscape, and look at the powerful pull this city has on new media, and the creation of new media companies, and the disruption that's going on in the traditional media, it's because we have linked journalism to technology. I have a friend who's a great music producer. He tells me that if you're a creative person, if you're a working person today, you're not just going to make it on your wits. You have to be in a media capital with great media channels and distribution systems, and you have to know how to work that media. This is an incredible pull. We're bolstering our technology. We're attracting some of the greatest technology talent and building some of the most powerful technology companies in the world, and with this university in Columbia and the new Cornell campus and more. The future at the high end and the ability of this city to attract people and talent from the globe, not just from the burbs, but from the globe. But on the other side are the two-thirds that are falling behind. If we have 1.5 million people in the creative and knowledge and technology sector, we have nearly 2 million in the service sector. They prepare our foods, they make our beds, they clean our homes, they take care of our landscapes, they take care of us in restaurants, they give us manicures and haircuts. They're the lifeblood of this city. They are an infrastructure in which the knowledge economy rests, and while the knowledge economy moves forward, they move backward. And that's what we're talking about, building on-ramps of inclusion, extending the benefits of the engine of clustering to this tremendous group of people. On a whole, they average about $38,000 a year, which isn't bad comparatively speaking if you look at them in contrast to service workers in other parts of the country. But when you look at the main segments, office administration, food service and preparation, personal services, and healthcare support, many of those workers barely crack $25,000. Most of them need 2 and 3 and 4. Family workers to make a living wage. We have to upgrade those jobs, and we have to build a new middle-class way of life. And that's what this project is about. We're going to be doing research on it, not just for the city as a whole. We're going to be releasing research briefs on each borough, and one of the things that strikes us is how part-time and temporary and self-employed this part of our economy is. You might think Manhattan is the center of freelance workers and the self-employed free agents. But in fact, the rates of self-employment and part-time work are 2 and 3 and 4 times higher in the outer boroughs for the low-paid, less skilled, marginalized service workers. So we have to work on 2 fronts. The first front is we got to make these jobs better jobs. The Comptroller has called for an emerging business council, a group of people who can work together in these emerging technologies, and he released that tremendous report about a year or so ago with his team about how do we make the technology economy work for more people. How do we include more people in its inner workings? We're going to have to upgrade those service jobs. We've got to increase the minimum wage. 50 to 60% of the local median wage is the figure the experts say will increase that wage and bolster our base, but not hurt our competitiveness. That's $15+ an hour, much higher than it needs to be in Buffalo or Syracuse or Phoenix. But we have to do more than that. Nearly 70 million Americans, 2 million New Yorkers toil in these low-wage service jobs. We can't just elevate the minimum wage. We've got to turn them into good family-supporting jobs. And I remember my father's words. My father was born in 1921 in Newark, New Jersey. Got a job in 1934 in the ironbound section of Newark at Victory Optical making eyeglasses. At the time he took that job in the middle of the Great Depression, it took 9 family members to make a living wage. 9 family members, his 6 siblings, himself and his mom and dad, my grandma and grandpa. My dad enlisted in World War II, stormed the beaches at Normandy, and fought in all those great battles. When he came back from the war, he told me, Rich, as if by magic, my crappy job turned into a good job. The unions did it. FDR did it. Collective bargaining did it. The Wagner Act did it. Rich. I could get married. I could buy a house, and they moved to a New Jersey Italian-American suburb called North Arlington. Buy a house, put you two boys through Catholic school and through Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. My dad became part of an American dream. But it was not only by making manufacturing jobs good jobs, and we have to do the same thing, and we can do the same thing for service jobs. Look, as a country, we decided we'd pay more for our cars, more for our washing machines, more for our television sets. Henry Ford understood this as well as FDR. We needed a middle class of workers to buy the stuff we were producing. We can pay a little bit more for a cup of coffee. We can pay a little bit more for a stay in a hotel. We can pay a little bit more to have our home cleaned. And it's really pennies on the dollar. And you know, a little bit more for people to take care of our kids, our aging parents. What's more important to you? The food that you eat, how your parents are cared for, how your kids are cared for, than the car you drive. And that car isn't even made here anymore. It's made overseas. So we got to bite the bullet, and we got to do that. And we're going to work on it. We're going to call together, the comptroller's already working on it. We're going to call together the leaders of the service. And you know what? This is good for them. I met with the head of a major real estate fund the other day who told me of her biggest problem. It used to be she couldn't find tech workers to work in her startup hubs. She now can't find retail workers and food preparation workers to work in the urban downtown stores because they have to live so far away that their commute is intolerable. And in many cities where they don't have a transit system like this one, they can't afford the commute. But it's not only that it's going to create a consuming base, it's not only that it's going to drive up demand. Our city service economy is the infrastructure, not only of tourism and travel and entertainment, it's the infrastructure which makes the knowledge economy thrive, making it more efficient, making it more skilled, making the people that work in it more engaged. And Zynet Ton, the great researcher at MIT Sloan School, shows the more you pay retail workers and service workers, the more you engage them in their work, they more than pay for that by returning that in better service delivery, better efficiency, and a higher stock price for the companies they work for. But then there's the other side of this. Just like in the New Deal, just like in the Great Depression, the last transformation, we not only have to build up a middle class by lifting up the wages, we've got to give people a new way of life. We've got to build an infrastructure, which is the comptroller's words, an infrastructure for an urban economy. Now think of it. For the past 50 years, since before I was born, since my dad was a kid, we've been building the infrastructure of a suburban American dream. We have been pouring tax dollars into building interstate highways, to subsidizing infrastructure, to incentivizing home mortgage loans, to creating secondary markets to flip mortgages around, which caused the crisis in the first place. A massive subsidy to a way of life that has outlived its shelf life and is actually counter to the clustering force that moves us forward. We have to make a shift that's bigger than that to both re-urbanize our cities, to create affordable housing. Oh, I said today here on NYU's campus, I use this as an example. You're looking at one of the great success stories of affordable housing in the world. Many of us, if not most of us, who are tenure-track faculty live in subsidized, university-subsidized housing, close to campus, enabling us to do our jobs and interact with students, and building a great knowledge hub. If it works for us, it can work for more people. But we can't just do this alone. The mayor can't just do this alone. This is going to take a bigger effort than all of us. What causes gentrification and housing unaffordability is not just an income and a skills gap. We are resting on the laurels of an infrastructure that's 100-plus years old. We haven't built any more of it. We haven't built much new transit. We haven't built much new rail. And so what happens? The people with means colonize those public goods. They colonize the transit stops. They colonize the places near the center because there's too little of it. And there's not enough density. So that more people, we have to invest in an infrastructure of transit-oriented development. We have to massively rescale, and it's not just creating, the comptroller said this so well, it's not just building affordable housing. That's an important part of the picture. It's building an entire infrastructure for an urban way of life. And you know what? We have a lot of big edge on a lot of other places that don't have any transit or rail connective infrastructure. We have the bones to build upon. Well, you know, I'm passionate about this, and I could talk all day about it, but I just want to summarize some of the key things that we think we should do going forward. We got to make a living wage a basic human right. We got to peg that at 50 to 60% of the local median. We got to upgrade those service sector jobs and call together the best and the brightest in industry that share that mission. We got to get together the Henry Fords of our day and have them show us a path to making higher paying, more engaged service jobs, bringing the real skills and paying the service workers for those skills. As the comptroller has outlined, we have to take a much broader view of high tech. We need to understand that every job in our future is a technology job. If you're going to be an artist, if you're going to be a musician, if you're going to do indie music, if you're going to do hip hop, if you're going to do rap, if you're going to do R&B, whatever you're going to do, you've got if you're going to be a journalist, at the time, the tragic time that my colleagues in journalism who do traditional print journalism are being laid off, there is a very high-paying market for data-driven journalists who know how to use computers and analyze and track big data. We've got to make sure that there are real on-ramps that connect everyone to the knowledge and technology economy. We got to set up real vocational training programs. We got to make sure that those kids who are interested in art, well, the comptroller mentioned how important art education, interested in music, have programs that they can link to, and if they're curious about that and curious about how to do digital technology and combine that, you know, and that's why in this new area of music, the Swedes and the Northern Europeans are eating our lunch. For the first time in modern history, they're eating our lunch because our kids may still have the musical talent and understand the rhythms and the beats, but they have had the access to the digital technology, and that's why they're becoming the greatest centers of production and producers in the world. We need not only high-tech incubators, we've done a great job on that, and accelerators. We need all tech, all creative, inclusive incubators. You know, part of this new dream is that you can do your own thing. Well, we have a great support structure for the professor with a new idea and PhD in software engineering or biotechnology. But for those young people who want to open everything from a manicure salon to a hair salon to a new printing business to whatever it is, we have to expand those supports. We have to build an infrastructure for a creative economy that includes everyone and that extends out to all the boroughs. And we need to make sure that infrastructure is broadband and high-tech, but is a transit infrastructure, which is second to none. We have to make sure that we can really build, and build more, not only in the city, but in the close areas where people want to live. It's not just affordable housing. It is. It's not just developing middle-class jobs. It is really about building an entire infrastructure of a new way of living and working, and that conversation has to start here because it clearly is not starting elsewhere, and it's not starting in Washington. I've already said what we will do. At NYU and our new initiative in creativity and innovation in cities, we'll be launching our research program. And our research program isn't going to be pie-in-the-sky research. It's going to be digging into these problems for the city as a whole and for each of the boroughs. Looking in detail at Brooklyn and Staten Island and Queens and every nook and corner of this city as to what their economic clusters are, what their economic assets and weaknesses are, and how they can capitalize. We're going to launch that certificate program aimed at training and retraining the next generation of urbanists, city builders, and urban economic developers. And we're going to extend this effort down to the high schools. We're going to hopefully begin to reach, and you can see it, you can see the generational shift. You can see the way so many of our young people are passionate about cities. We're going to create a discipline around urbanism and city building. We're going to become a hub of this conversation, working with colleagues like Dean Scanlon, working in our school, working in this university, colleagues like Mitch Moss and Paul Romer and Steve Koonin. We're going to be a big hub of this conversation. And we're going to make it an inclusive conversation that includes all of you that want to work with us. You see, where else can it be done? We live in the most powerful city in the world, a city that has increased its economic distance, even over London and Hong Kong and Shanghai. We live in a city that's it's millions upon millions of people, and a metro that's 20 or 25 million and continues to grow and attract the best of the brightest from around the world. And in the past, it's the place that has led these transformations. It's the place that the textile industry was born, not too far from here. The first technology-infused factories in and around Soho. The place that launched a garment workers union and a garment workers movement. The neighborhoods of the East Village and the Lower East Side. That's where workers organized to demand better rights. Place that launched Jane Jacobs and changed the way we think of urbanism. You see, every time there's been a test and an economic transformation, New York City has been the place that's led the world. I know it seems tough, and that some of us are pessimistic, and that some of the best minds of my generation of urbanists think, oh my God, things couldn't be worse. Things could not be worse. Our neighborhoods are gentrifying. They're becoming homogeneous. The diversity, from David Byrne to Moby, they're telling us we're no longer a center of creativity. Baloney. The city's best days are ahead of us. For sure, urbanism's best days are ahead of us. Because the motor force of economic development, which used to be movement to the suburbs, creating holes in the donuts, has been turned around. Because the motor force of economic development is exactly what Jane Jacobs told us it was. It was the clustering of diverse groups of people in urban centers. Now, it may look like that's tough to achieve, but it's much tougher to refill that hole in the donut. The task before us right now is simple. We have to grab that clustering force, we have to grab that economic engine, and we have to make it work for more people. We have to build those very real on-ramps to a creative and inclusive economy, and we have to make sure that we build the broad infrastructure, urban infrastructure we need to make sure that we're not only competitive and economically successful, but the benefits of our economic success extend to all our people. That's a grand mission, but it's one that all of us are really very serious about. Thanks you for your patience and listening, and look forward to working with you on this effort.